The other mechanics laughed when Ryland Shaw rolled the battered hull into Dock C, dragging the scorched metal wreck behind a half-functioning tractor beam like some kind of wounded animal. A few even bet on how many days before he gave up and sold it for scrap. "Waste of space," muttered Growl Vost, the Drecker foreman, spitting a wad of oil-thick phlegm into a bucket. "Even for a human, that's low-tier desperation." But Ryland wasn't listening. He rarely did. Tuning out the noise, he stood beside the broken ship, staring at its ragged edges and cracked armor plating. It was older than anything he'd ever seen, clearly pre-Galactic Accord, maybe even pre-Fold era. Its architecture defied standard blueprints, angular in places, but smooth in ways that hinted at something grown, not built. The faded emblem on its hull had been sanded and scorched beyond recognition, but there was a strange hum beneath the metal that pulled at him. It felt alive, in the way some machines do when you're around them long enough to know they're more than gears and wires. The scrapyard where he found it, buried half beneath an avalanche of twisted exoframes and decomposing drones, wasn't supposed to exist. The nav charts called it a null zone, a dead pocket in the void, lost between failed hyperlanes. The kind of place smugglers use to dump evidence or pirates abandon their spoils. And yet there it was, sitting there like it had been waiting for someone. The truth was, Ryland didn't bring the ship back because he thought it had value. He brought it back because he felt it had a story. He wasn't like the other mechanics on Yalrek Station. They wanted speed, upgrades, glory. He just wanted machines to talk to him, to tell him what they remembered, to whisper what they'd been before they were ruined. That's how he ended up here, on the outermost ring of a mining world that stank of ozone and burning lubricant, tucked in Dock C of a rundown orbital station where everything worked just enough to avoid exploding. Most humans left the trade-edge colonies a generation ago, after the resource war gutted Earth's last off-world fleets. But not Ryland. His mother had been a mechanic too, one of the last who could speak fluent quantum circuit. She used to say, "We fix the things people forget because forgotten things remember us." Ryland believed that, even when the plasma torches failed, even when his hands bled from cold steel fractures, even when no one else did. He spent the first 2 days just cleaning the thing. The ship's outer shell was thicker than it should have been, like it had grown extra layers over centuries of battle damage. No automated systems came online. The reactor core was cold, but intact. He had to bypass 3 dead ignition nodes before he even got power flowing to the auxiliary systems. When he did, half the lights inside blinked into life for a second and died again, like a coma patient fluttering their eyelids. He stayed late, alone, working under the violet glow of a single overhead strip, surrounded by a fortress of coffee mugs, cracked data pads, and half-assembled replacement parts. Other mechanics passed by, tossing sneers or side comments his way. Why is he wasting time on that rust bucket? Probably thinks it'll imprint on him like a lost dog. You know humans. Sentimental idiots. Let them talk. He knew what he saw. Every night, the hum beneath the hull grew stronger. By the end of the 4th day, he managed to patch together the secondary interface. The display flickered to life, long enough to show a language he'd never seen before. It wasn't Galcom. It wasn't even from the known linguistic trees. But it felt familiar. He recorded the glyphs and sent them through 4 different translators. Nothing. Not even a partial match. That didn't happen. Not in a galaxy where machines had mapped 90% of every language spoken across 10,000 star systems. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was what happened when he touched the console the second time. Pain shot through his arm like a hot wire, racing up his nerves and into his skull. He stumbled back, gasping. The station's systems flickered for a heartbeat, just one, and then returned to normal. No one else noticed. But the ship's lights didn't die again. This time they stayed on. A slow, steady pulse of bioluminescent glow from within, illuminating the corridors like veins of molten starlight. He sat down hard on the metal floor and laughed. It wasn't joy. It wasn't victory. It was awe. Ryland Shaw had worked on everything from freighters to frigates, warships to cruise liners, civilian hoppers, to mercenary death engines cobbled together with tech stolen from half a dozen factions. But none of them had pulse like this. None of them had responded to his touch like it recognized him. That was the moment he knew. This ship wasn't just old. It wasn't just lost. It was hiding, and he'd found it. The next morning, Dockmaster Trent Valak came down to investigate the energy usage. Valak was a surly, ex-military bureaucrat who barely tolerated humans on his station. He scowled the readouts and scowled harder at Rylan. "You're drawing too much power from the lower conduits," he snapped. "You're trying to light up half the damn ring." "I rerouted from my own reserves," Rylan replied calmly. "Didn't touch station supply." Valak narrowed his eyes. "That wreck isn't a registered vessel. You want to keep it here? You pay double dock fees starting now." Rylan nodded. "Fine. You'll bankrupt yourself," Valak sneered. "For what? Ancient garbage." Rylan stared at him for a long moment. "Then I guess I'll be the richest man in the graveyard when this garbage wakes up." Valak snorted and walked off, muttering about the insanity of soft-blooded engineers. But the moment he left, the ship's core glowed brighter, and Rylan could have sworn he heard something just at the edge of his hearing. A wordless whisper. A low, resonant sound like breath being drawn. Later that night, Rylan stayed inside the cockpit chamber. It wasn't a standard layout. There was no clear pilot seat, no traditional controls. Instead, the space was circular, with a raised platform in the center and lines of circuitry embedded in the walls like abstract runes. He placed both palms on the pedestal and closed his eyes. Something responded. Not a voice. Not exactly. A presence. It felt massive, ancient, sleeping just beneath the surface. He didn't speak aloud, didn't dare. But in his mind, he thought, "Who are you?" There was no reply, only silence. And then, just before he broke contact, a single image bloomed behind his eyes. A star field, unknown constellations, alien nebulae. And in the middle of it, a fleet. Dark, regal, terrifying in its symmetry. At its heart was this ship. And the others, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, bowed to it. Rylan gasped and stumbled back, shaking. His hands were trembling, not from fear, from awe. That's when he knew the truth, even if he couldn't explain it yet. This ship wasn't forgotten. It had chosen to sleep, and now for some reason, it was choosing to wake up. With him, he turned toward the hangar entrance as a shadow moved beyond the doorway. Someone was watching him, someone who didn't belong here. Hummed to himself as he tightened the plasma feed coupler, his gloved fingers moving with calm precision. The ship didn't even have a transponder ID. That alone should have made him wary. Ships without registry were usually pirate bait, war relics, or worse. Smugglers' tombs left floating cold and silent in the black. But this one had something different about it. Something under the grime, rust, and carbon scoring. Something familiar. Rylan, a gruff voice barked behind him, breaking his concentration. Still banging on that floating coffin, he didn't have to look. The voice belonged to Graal Vost, thick-limbed Drekker foreman from the salvage yards who had made it a personal sport to torment the human since Rylan had set up shop on Yalrek 6 years ago. "Careful, Graal," Rylan muttered, not looking up from his work. "You'll hurt her feelings." Graal's 3 nostrils flared with a snort. If that hunk of junk had feelings, they'd be suicidal. "What is this, your new project?" "Thought the last one blew up in Dock D when you tried to rewire the flux inverters." Rylan gave a manifold a satisfying twist and stood, wiping grease across his already filthy jumpsuit. It flew 6 meters before the core misaligned. That's progress. Only by human standards. Graal's mandibles clicked in amusement. 2 of his crew, skinny Keltari twins with sharp eyes and sharper tongues, snickered behind him. "Why don't you come work for real mechanics instead of playing with ghosts?" Rylan looked past them toward the other hangars. Bright lights, rows of automated drones, techs in pristine suits working like synchronized dancers. Corporate crews. Their ships were clean and soulless, like everything the conglomerates touched. "No thanks," Rylan said. "I like machines that fight back. Means they've got a story." Graal sneered. "You'll be the only one who cares when that story ends with your parts scattered across orbit." The Drekker turned and trudged away, laughter echoing off the hangar walls. Rylan watched him go, then returned his gaze to the ship. It was a strange vessel, angular like a warcraft, but with curve along the hull that suggested something older, more elegant. Its paint had long since been eaten away by radiation and time, leaving only the ghost of a sigil he couldn't decipher. And beneath its hull plating, when he'd cut open the shielding, he'd found things no ship that size should have. Reactive mesh wiring, triphase capacitors fused with organic material, even a voice-activated logic core that refused to respond. Still, it purred now, softly, like something stirring after a long sleep. And that's what made him keep working on it. By the second cycle of the day, he was deep in the ship's dorsal conduit chamber, shoulder pressed against a humming coil, when he heard someone clear their throat behind him. He startled and twisted, head bumping the ceiling, and found himself face to face with a woman. Or at least, mostly woman. She was tall, dressed in matte gray armor with no insignia, a long braid of coppery hair falling past her shoulders. Her eyes, however, weren't human. They were a shade of blue so deep they looked like they held stars. And when she spoke, her voice had a strange cadence, measured, deliberate, like every syllable was tested before leaving her lips. "You are the mechanic?" Rylan blinked. "That's me. You've activated a dormant sovereign-class interface core," she said. "Either you're very brave or very stupid. Usually both." He slid out from the crawl space, brushing dust off his sleeves. "You interested in hiring me? Or are you here to tell me it's your ship and I'm trespassing?" She paused. "No, it is not mine, but I know what it is. That makes one of us. You are sitting on a god." Rylan frowned. "Right. And you're what, the prophet?" She didn't smile. Instead, she stepped closer, eyes scanning the ship like she was reading invisible patterns across its battered frame. "This vessel is not from this cycle," she said. "It is pre-archaeotronic. Its AI core, if awakened, could override every fleet protocol written in the last 1,000 years. Ships like this weren't built. They were summoned." "Summoned," Rylan echoed. "Lady, you've been spending too much time near old radiation leaks." Her stare sharpened. "You've bonded to it. I can see the resonance field. You've connected with it, by accident or fate." He shook his head and leaned against the railing. "Look, I just patched some conduits and replaced a few coils. I worked on weird ships before. This one's just older." She tilted her head. "What's your name, human?" "Rylan Shaw." Her eyes narrowed. "Of course it is." He was about to ask what that meant when a low rumble shook the ground beneath them. Not from the ship, but from outside the hangar. Rylan turned just as the alarm lights began to flash red. "Incoming vessel. Unauthorized. High-velocity approach vector." "What the hell?" he muttered, just as the deck vibrated with the thunder of landing thrusters. A sleek, black ship slammed into Dock C's platform like a blade into flesh. It was shaped like a predator, narrow, lean, deadly. No registration, no identifiers. The woman's eyes went cold. "They found it." "Who?" Rylan asked, backing toward the ship. But before she could answer, the hangar doors exploded inward with a burst of smoke and shrieking metal. Figures stepped through, tall, armored, faceless. 8 of them. Their armor shimmered with active camouflage, and their weapons were not standard issue. Plasma lances. Disruptor arcs. One carried a containment sphere humming with containment fields. Bounty hunters. No, worse. Collectors. "Get behind the ship," the woman ordered. Rylan didn't argue. He scrambled for cover as she drew a blade from her back. A long, humming thing that bent light around it. The lead collector stepped forward. Its voice buzzed from a voice modulator. "Step away from the vessel. Now." She didn't move. "You know what this ship is. You know it's not yours." "It's no one's," the voice replied. "It belongs to the archive now. And so does the mechanic." Rylan froze. "Me? I just fixed the thing. The moment you woke it, it chose you," the woman said. "And now they'll take you apart piece by piece to see how." The collector raised his arm, and the ship, silent until now, roared to life. Energy surged from beneath its hull, engines lighting up with a blinding pulse of violet light. Panels slid open along its flanks. A low, deep thrumming filled the hangar, vibrating in Rylan's chest like a second heartbeat. Then the ship spoke. "Do not touch my mechanic." The words were not loud, but they shook the air like thunder. Every collector froze. For a breathless moment, even time seemed to hold still. Ryland's jaw dropped. Did that ship just— The vessel's cannons deployed, targeting systems flashing to life. "Final warning," it said. "Back away from Ryland Shaw." And then the first shot fired. Ryland didn't sleep that night. He stayed in the ship, curled near the pedestal in the center of the command chamber, staring at the softly glowing conduits pulsing around him. The strange hum had shifted, deepened, resonated, and it was no longer subtle. The ship wasn't just waking up. It was aware. Occasionally, a spark would ripple down the walls like lightning trapped in liquid glass. The old hull creaked and stretched, not from strain, but as though testing forgotten muscles. The image of the fleet still burned behind his eyes, too vivid to be imagination. He tried to access the console again, but this time it responded differently. The interface lit up before he touched it, glyphs flashing across the screen faster than he could record them. The language still didn't translate, but it felt like it wanted to, as though the ship was trying to communicate, but didn't yet remember how. Just before dawn, a single word formed on the interface. Simple, clear, Sentinel. He didn't know what it meant. A name? A function? The moment he whispered it aloud, the entire ship shuddered. Not in violence, but in response. The same way a dog perks up when it hears its name after years of abandonment. Sentinel. The station lights outside flickered again. Something was happening to Dock C, and only Dock C. By mid-morning, word had spread across the station. Several mechanics, smugglers, and curious mercs gathered near the hangar bay, watching from a distance. Some pretended not to care. Others pointed toward the ship with suspicion. And still, Ryland worked, replacing plasma conduits, cleaning intake ports, polishing ancient metal plating like he was restoring a masterpiece. By noon, he wasn't alone anymore. A woman stood at the far end of the dock, silent as a shadow. She wasn't in any station uniform. Her clothes were layered, high-collared, stitched with dark blue threads that shimmered like a star map. Her eyes glowed faintly, silver, reflective, and unreadable. Not cybernetic, but not natural either. "Can I help you?" Ryland asked cautiously. She stepped forward, slow and deliberate, as though her movements were calculated millennia ago. "That ship," she said, her voice like glass over water, "is not yours." Ryland didn't flinch. "I found it in a salvage heap. No claim tags. No registered signature." "You misunderstand," she said. "It does not belong to anyone. It never has. It is older than this station. Older than your species." He looked back at the ship. "Then why did it let me fix it?" Her eyes lingered on him. "That is what I intend to find out." Before he could reply, 3 more figures stepped into the hangar, tall, lean, clad in midnight armor. Not station guards. Their gear was too advanced, too sleek, and utterly silent. One of them raised an arm. Ryland's instinct screamed before his brain processed the movement. He dove, just as a pulse bolt seared past his head and struck the wall behind him. The woman didn't move. She simply raised her hand, and every light in Dock C exploded in synchronized bursts. Sparks rained down like miniature meteor showers. The attack squad froze, blinking rapidly in confusion as their armor flickered. Then, impossibly, the ship moved. It didn't fly. It didn't rise. It shifted. The hull unfolded slightly, panels rearranged with eerie precision, revealing a seam that hadn't existed before. A soft, vibrating tone echoed out of its core, and the woman turned her head sharply toward it. They recognized the song, she whispered, not to Ryland, but to herself. The soldiers retreated instinctively. Whatever they had come to secure, they weren't prepared for this. "Who are you?" Ryland asked her, breathless. "I am called Velatraxis. I serve the vault of the silent choir," she said. "We guard lost knowledge, forbidden designs, machines too dangerous to awaken." He stared at her. "And this ship is one of them." "No," she said slowly, her voice heavy with something close to reverence. "This ship is the first of them." She reached into her coat and withdrew a black rod, no longer than a finger, and held it toward the ship. The glyphs on the hull lit up, blazing across the side like fire catching on oil. Then the ship spoke. The voice wasn't synthetic. It wasn't male or female. It was ancient, layered, like a choir whispering in a dream. The words emerged not from speakers, but from the very metal around them. "You are not worthy." The rod in her hand exploded. Vel screamed as a blinding pulse flung her backward. She hit the dock floor hard, dazed, her hand charred. The soldiers opened fire again, but this time the ship moved faster. A ripple of blue energy extended from the pedestal to the outer hull. A defense shield, not visible to the naked eye, but lethal. Every bolt that hit it reverse direction midair, two struck the shooters directly, sending them flying. Ryland ducked behind a fuel drum, heart pounding. He looked toward Vel, who was coughing, burned but alive. "You try to override it," he said. "I try to bind it," she gasped. "It should not have rejected me. Only the Imperator lineage could command the Sentinels." "Then why didn't it stop me?" he asked. Vel's eyes widened slowly as realization crept in. "Oh, stars! What? Your blood," she whispered. "You're not just some station mechanic." "I'm just Ryland Shaw," he said. She stared at him, pale now. That name, there was a Shaw, one of the last Terran engineers to be invited to the high thrones before the collapse. He vanished. No one ever found out what happened to him. "That was my great-grandfather," Ryland replied slowly. "He disappeared near the neutral rings." Vel looked at him as though he were a ghost. "No, he didn't disappear. He hid something, a legacy." Before Ryland could reply, a new alert sounded across the hangar. Unauthorized warp signature. Inbound vessel. Massive energy reading. A ship dropped from fold space directly above the outer docking rings. It was black, sleek, silent. No lights, no insignia, but Sentinel reacted instantly. Its hull lit up from stern to prow. A deep hum, almost a growl, rose from the floor and sent tremors through the walls. "What is that?" Ryland asked, watching the sky through the viewport. Vel's voice trembled now. "They found it." "Who?" "The ones who built the Sentinels, and then swore to destroy them." Above them, the black ship split open like a blooming flower of shadow. Dozens of dark shapes poured out, sleek, humanoid, and fast. Ryland's hand reached for the pedestal again as the interface flared with impossible symbols. One word emerged among the alien glyphs, scrawled in letters even he could read. "Awaken." And the ship obeyed. With a sound like breaking gravity, Sentinel roared to life. Doxy shook under the sudden ignition of engines that hadn't burned in 1,000 years. Sentinel rose from the deck with grace and fury, light blooming under it in concentric rings like ripples in time itself. Ryland stood in the command chamber, his hands locked on the pedestal as streams of alien glyphs danced across the interface. The ship had no yoke, no traditional controls, only intent. It was reading his. Outside, the sky cracked open. The black vessel hanging above the station, a dreadship older than any registry, continued to release its children. Sleek hunter drones, humanoid constructs of alloy and shadow, dropping into dock C in waves. The first wave landed near the fuel racks. Their movement was too fluid for machines, too emotionless for life. They had no visible weapons, just elongated arms that folded out into curved blades. They moved in perfect synchrony, advancing toward Vel and the still-smoking pedestal where she had tried to bind the ship. Ryland didn't wait. "Sentinel," he said, steadying his breath, "they're here for you. What do we do?" The interface responded immediately, symbols reordering, spinning, collapsing into simple Terran English. "Protect the legacy." Light flared along the inner ring of the command chamber. Dozens of panels split open across the floor and walls, revealing weapons arrays, drone launch bays, and something else, spheres that hovered, pulsed, then vanished into the hull like seeds into fertile soil. From outside the viewport, the drones met the intruders with blinding precision. Energy pulses, silent, colorless, invisible until they struck, sliced through the enemy like hot blades through frost. But it wasn't enough. The dreadship responded. Its underbelly cracked open wider, revealing a gaping maw of hexagonal ports. A massive form descended, taller than the hangar itself, wrapped in jagged metal plates and black gold armor, inscribed with glyphs that twisted even as they were looked upon. Vel screamed. It's a Harrow-class executioner. The massive machine hit the floor with a crash that cracked reinforced durasteel. Its face was featureless, a mask with 7 vertical lines like tally marks. It scanned the hangar with something deeper than optics, and it turned directly towards Sentinel. Then it spoke, not in sound but in sheer pressure. A psychic scream that reverberated through the air like gravity inverted. Abomination. Deactivate. Sentinel's lights dimmed. The ship hesitated. Its engines flickered. Ryland staggered as his vision filled with static and black vines of thought, not his own. He was trying to shut the ship down from inside his mind. Vel crawled up beside him, clutching her side. You have to sever the connection. I'm the connection, Ryland gritted. He forced his mind back into clarity, staring down at the console. Sentinel, override that signal. Restore control. Source code corrupted. Permission required. Bloodline prime. Ryland's heart pounded. My grandfather, he whispered. What did he give me? Instinct surged. He pulled off the glove on his right hand and slammed his palm onto the pedestal. The console lit up gold. Genetic marker accepted. Lineage confirmed. Prime protocols engaged. Sentinel's lights flared again. All systems rebooted simultaneously. And then it roared. The ship surged forward without warning. Not through the hangar doors, but through the air, vertically, as if gravity were a mild suggestion. It tore through the roof of Dock C like parchment, ascending into open space in seconds. The dreadship responded. Its executioner launched after them, propelling itself with sickening grace. In the command chamber, Ryland was no longer standing on a docked relic. He was piloting a war god. Sentinel systems synchronized with him. He saw through hull sensors as if they were eyes, felt the pulse of energy through conduits as if through veins. It wasn't just him and the ship anymore. They were one. Target locked, Sentinel intoned. Engage, Ryland growled. Weapons pods unfolded from the wings, streamlined, ancient, but impossibly efficient. The first volley fired. Beams of impossible spectrum that bent space slightly as they traveled. They struck the executioner, blasting molten rifts across its armor. But the machine didn't fall. It returned fire. The void turned into a battlefield. Vel had secured herself in the second command seat, interfacing with auxiliary systems. We can't win in a straight fight, she shouted. Its core is quantum phased. It'll keep adapting. I don't need to beat it, Ryland said. Just trap it. Sentinel responded with a flash of anticipation. New glyphs formed. Containment strategy initiated. The ship dropped suddenly, diving under the dreadship. It skimmed the edge of the station ring before flipping completely upside down, rotating in a spiral pattern that made no aerodynamic sense because it wasn't using aerodynamics. It was manipulating gravity fields like a master sculptor. The executioner followed, matching speed, but not maneuverability. Ryland triggered the containment net. From Sentinel's rear, a sphere of distortion launched, like a tear in space shaped into a tether. It hit the executioner dead center. The machine staggered. The net expanded, glowing with symbols from a time before written history. The Harrow class began to freeze mid-motion, limbs locking, body convulsing. Now, Vel shouted. Ryland didn't hesitate. He routed all reactor power to the forward emitters and fired a continuous beam directly into the netted target. The executioner screamed, not in sound, but in psychic feedback. The entire dreadship shuddered, flickered, and cracked. Inside Sentinel, alarms flared. Countermeasure detected, Vel shouted. They're destabilizing the net. Then we end it here. Ryland pulled power from every system. Life support, shielding, everything. Sentinel obeyed without question. The beam condensed to a single point of light, white, pure, absolute, and speared through the executioner's chest. A final pulse, a death cry across the void. The dread construct exploded, its psychic scream silenced in an instant. Silence returned to space. Rylan fell back, exhausted. The pedestal dimmed, going still. Outside, the rest of the hunter drones, cut off from command, drifted lifelessly. The dreadship reeled, cracked and faltering. Within seconds, it turned and jumped away in a fold space, leaking energy as it vanished. Only then did Sentinel return to stillness. Rylan slumped to the floor, staring up at the glowing core above him. Vel exhaled slowly. "You don't realize what you've done." "I fixed a ship," he whispered. She looked at him with awe and dread. "You didn't just fix it, you woke it up. And now, the galaxy will know." Rylan didn't respond. Outside, half the station had gone dark, but every window faced one thing. The ship that had once been called junk, and the man who sat at its heart. Doxy had never been quiet before. Not like this. Not with the kind of silence that wrapped around you and pressed down into your chest, like it was afraid to breathe without permission. The station's internal systems were still glitching, flickering in waves of energy left behind by the battle. Emergency lights cast long shadows over the broken gantries, twisted rails, and piles of scorched drone wreckage. Rylan stood at the edge of the hangar, Sentinel hovering just meters off the ground, as still and imposing as a statue carved from war and myth. The warship was no longer dormant. It was watching. Vel leaned on a makeshift crutch, a pressure bandage wrapped around her ribs, her uniform scorched and torn. She limped toward Rylan, who had been staring at the ship for an hour, in complete silence. "They've evacuated most of the upper rings," she said, voice low. "Some of the counselors already put in for off-world relocation. They're scared." Rylan didn't answer. He still wore the grease-stained jumpsuit of a ship mechanic. But now, every step he took echoed a little louder in the hangar. Not because he had changed his gait, but because everyone who heard him walk was listening for the man who'd piloted a dead god back to life. "Scared of me," he finally said. "Scared of what you represent?" She corrected. His eyes drifted to the sky above, what was left of the shattered dome, still exposed to open stars and residual light from the planet beyond. "I didn't ask for this," he murmured. "I was just trying to fix something. That's all I've ever done. Put broken things back together." Vel chuckled, wincing slightly from the effort. "You didn't just fix a ship, Rylan. You changed the board, the power balance. You show the galaxy that humans don't need fleets to be dangerous. We just need one man and the right wrench." "Great," he muttered. "So now I'm a political weapon." She stepped in front of him, narrowing her eyes. "You think this was ever about just machines?" Sentinel was locked down for a reason. Your grandfather didn't just hide it. He encoded it with a bloodline lock and then vanished. Because he knew what it could do. No, because he knew what you could do. One day, Rylan turned back to Sentinel, the ship's hull reflecting distorted images of the two of them like shadows on rippling water. "I don't want to be a savior, Vel. You don't get to choose how people see you, but you do get to choose what to do next." He sighed. "And what is next?" She pulled a data slate from her coat. It was cracked and blinking, but operational. "This came in an hour ago. Encrypted burst signal. Origin point is outside charted galactic zones. Deep black." She handed it to him. The message was short. No metadata, just coordinates. And a name. Prime protocol detected. Error identified. Return requested. It was signed with a single word in ancient script, but the translation scrolled across the bottom. "Fortress." Rylan stared at it. "Someone out there knows," he said slowly. Vel nodded. "And they've been waiting. A long time." He looked back at Sentinel, at the hull plates now repaired, the interior running systems humming at optimal efficiency. A thought crept in, unbidden. This ship wasn't made for war. It was made to be passed down, not a weapon. A legacy. "Is it a trap?" he asked. Vel gave a half-smile. "Probably. And we're going anyway." "Of course." For a moment, the weight of it all hovered in the air between them. The end of his anonymity. The burden of the past. The questions no one could answer yet. But also, something else. Hope. Maybe the galaxy didn't just need heroes with guns and starfleets. Maybe it needed mechanics. Builders. People who knew how to take shattered things and make them whole again. Rylan stepped towards Sentinel. The ship opened without a sound. Inside, the interface lit up, welcoming him with a pulsing glow that felt almost alive. Like the ship had been waiting for his return all along. Coordinates locked, the ship announced. Engines charged. Shall we depart? He looked over his shoulder one last time. The hangar, the debris, the faint smears of oil and memory. Yeah, he said. Let's go see what else my family left lying around. Vel slid into the co-pilot's seat as the hatch sealed shut behind them. Sentinel rose smoothly, gliding out into the void. The stars ahead stretched like silver threads across a tapestry of black. And behind them, Doc C watched in silence as the last mechanic it would ever mock disappeared into legend. Far across the galaxy, in a place no chart reached, lights stirred in the dark. Massive structures turned like clockwork in space, ancient beyond time, waiting. They had slumbered for ages, waiting for the prime heir to return. And now, they knew, he was awake. In the wake of Ryland Shaw's departure aboard the reawakened Sentinel, the galactic balance did not simply shift, it fractured. At first, the disappearance was whispered about in corridors of military councils and corporate war rooms. Then the footage leaked. A single human mechanic, covered in grease, commanding a ship that defied known technology, destroying fleets with surgical precision. There was no navy behind him, no government, just one man, one ship, and the silence he left behind. That silence became legend. 3 years later, the outer syndicates collapsed without a shot fired. Their strongest dreadnoughts, parked outside the capital moons, had been found disassembled overnight, each component perfectly stacked on the orbital dock like museum pieces. No deaths, no alarms, just mechanical artistry of impossible precision. A crude message was burned into the hull of the Central Command ship. Fix what you break. In the core worlds of the Yekari Dominion, the ruling council held an emergency summit after dozens of their war factories ceased functioning. The machines refused to operate. AI intelligences that had obeyed for centuries began rerouting power, denying commands, and transmitting new schematics, written in ancient Terran dialects. The Dominion thought it was sabotage. It wasn't. Sentinel had simply awakened the ancient ship minds buried within forgotten fleets across the galaxy. Their last protocol, coded generations ago in an extinct dialect, was triggered by Ryland's unique genetic imprint. These weren't just ships. They were part of something larger. A network. A covenant. And their time had come. The galactic media dubbed it the Mechanics' Rebellion. But Ryland wasn't leading an army. He wasn't speaking to the press or taking planets. He was moving, one broken outpost, one dying station at a time. He arrived quietly, fixed things, left messages behind. Some were blueprints, others were warnings, and some were hope. Entire sectors once ruled by fear began to self-govern. Alien species who had once mocked humanity now adopted human engineering principles. Efficiency, elegance, and empathy. Trade flourished. Wars waned. Ryland's legend grew with every jump, every beacon, every system recalibrated not for conquest, but for collaboration. Yet not all saw it as salvation. In the dark corners of the galaxy, old powers stirred. One such force was the Corinth Triumvirate, an ancient triumvirate that had long remained hidden, manipulating conflicts through proxy empires. They had once fought the early humans during the expansion wars and were defeated, but they remembered. Oh, they remembered. And they feared a second coming. To them, Ryland wasn't a mechanic. He was the signal, the harbinger of the old cycle's reawakening, and they decided to extinguish it before the fire spread. 6 years after Sentinel's return, a confrontation occurred near the event horizon of the black hole in Sector 09X. Ryland never fired a shot. When the Triumvirate's flagship fleet approached, he simply transmitted a single command in a language they hadn't heard in 10,000 years. An override embedded in the core of every ship design they'd secretly co-opted from early human engineering. Their weapons disarmed. Their shields collapsed. Their engines melted into stasis. And the crew was left adrift, alive, unharmed, and staring into the gravity well that now held them suspended like forgotten relics. Then Sentinel left. The message? Control is not power. Understanding is. The galaxy had changed. 20 years after the hangar incident on Dock C, Vel stood in the Galactic Tribunal Hall, now rebuilt, redesigned in part from Rylan schematics. She wore the robes of a mediator now, not a commander. Beside her stood scholars, engineers, and a dozen alien representatives, former enemies, now allies. Together, they unveiled the Codex of Maintenance. It wasn't a constitution or a treaty. It was a set of guiding principles passed down from the systems Rylan had touched. Treat machines as partners. Designed for repair, not obsolescence. Build systems that heal rather than dominate. In a sense, it wasn't just about ships. It was about civilization. It was about giving the universe tools to fix itself. Some had scoffed, but not for long. The Codex became the cornerstone of a new interstellar movement, the Rebuilders. No borders, no armies, just teams of engineers, scientists, and philosophers who believed that nothing was too broken to be made whole again. At the heart of every Rebuilder base, a statue stood of a human in a mechanic's jumpsuit, holding a wrench in one hand and a datapad in the other. No weapon, no crown, just tools. And below, a plaque in a dozen languages. He never ruled. He simply repaired. Yet, there were other consequences. Sentinel was not the only ancient ship awakened by Rylan's presence. Across the far spiral arms of the galaxy, other vessels began activating. Some were benign, rebuilding as he had. Others, less so. One in particular, Warden, did not share Sentinel's moral core. Designed as a fail-safe protocol during the height of the Human Draconis War, it had no pilot, only a directive: neutralize threats to the prime air. Now awake, it began to move, across dead sectors, through ghost fleets. Hunting. Vel watched these reports from a Rebuilder outpost deep in the galactic fringe. Her hair had grayed. Her movements were slower, but her eyes were still sharp. She activated a hidden file. It was Rylan's last transmission. He had vanished 12 years ago, without warning, after visiting the system labeled Fortress, a world no one else had found since. Sentinel's signal went dark. Some said he died. Others believed he became part of the ship itself. A digital soul in an eternal vessel. The last words in his message played across the screen. I fixed what I could. The rest is up to you. And if things break again, look for the lights in the dark. I'll be out there. She smiled softly and deactivated the message. Somewhere, far beyond the reach of maps and transmission beacons, an ancient force stirred, but so did the memory of a human with dirt under his nails, stubborn in his kindness, relentless in his repairs. A myth, maybe, but myths have teeth. In time, the name Rylan Shaw became more than legend. It became a verb. To Rylan, something meant to fix it in spite of impossible odds. To defy destruction with ingenuity. To believe, even in the darkest moments, that broken things, people, machines, worlds could still be whole. A new ship design was commissioned, based on Sentinel's recovered schematics. It was named Shaw Class. Not a warship, but a healer. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. Memory faded. But in the edges of explored space, when a beacon flickered in the void, when help came not in fleets, but in the whir of tools and the light of understanding, people remembered. And one phrase remained whispered among the stars, words spoken in defiance, in hope, in unbreakable will. Human, don't stop.